Hello, this is Russell Dobular filling in for Jimmy Dore, who should be landing any minute now. I know the throngs are already at LAX waiting. It's very much like the Beatles' first trip to New York. So if you're out there, say hi to him. We will see him soon. We are joined today by my colleague, Keaton Weiss, and by a guy that nobody's heard from in like a year. It's crazy. He used to be very loud. Now he's being really quiet. Matt Taibbi. Let's welcome Matt Taibbi to the show. How are you, Matt?
I'm good. How are you doing, Russ?
All right. We're finally getting some of that weather that I've been hearing about. It's actually very nice today. It's been freezing here.
Don't we? Yeah, you look good. You look less right wing without the goatee. The goatee was pretty right wing. Yeah. I gotta say, I mean, I would say you're half out of the woods, but you know, people must tell you a lot that you look young for your age, which means you must exercise and stay in good health. That's also right wing, to be in good physical health.
Oh, so, yeah, I heard that like exercise codes is right wing now.
That's right wing, exactly. Yes, so really what you got to do, I mean, you're off to a good start losing the goatee because that was extremely right wing, but now I would say gain 75 pounds. And, you know, you don't have to signal your class privilege by washing your face every day. You could grow a few pimples and put on a few pounds, and then you'll be in the clear. No one will bother you. They'll be like, oh, this is a legit leftist right here. No questions asked.
That's excellent. That's a really good idea.
That's a good idea. I mean, it's a lot easier than like writing all these articles, things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, I got a couple of comments about the goatee. With people seriously suggesting that there was a right wing element to it.
Really, having a goatee?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I actually I told somebody last time you were on that we were almost exactly the same age, and somebody said, "Yeah, Russ has done some hard living."
That's not very nice.
Yeah, well,
I'm sure I look a lot worse inside. Trust me.
I don't know about that. I like those double doubles at In-N-Out Burger. That's not. I'm sure it's not doing any good for my insides. But you can't have them back in New York, fortunately. Oh, I've got to intro you, Matt. We are nothing here if not pros. All right, so Matt Taibbi is an author and journalist who has reported on finance, media, politics, and sports. A former contributing editor for Rolling Stone, he is the author of several best-selling books, including Insane Clown President, I Can't Breathe, and Hate Inc. His newsletter, Racket News, currently boasts more than 100,000 subscribers on Substack, and he also co-hosts the America This Week podcast with novelist Walter Kern. All right. Welcome, Matt.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Of course. All right. So this is where you started a shitstorm this week, like you do. All right. So you put this, originally you put this up on Notes, I'm assuming, and then somebody copied it to Twitter, right?
Well, somebody asked me the question, so.
Okay, so you were responding to a question, honestly, and you got it opened a lot of wounds for a lot of people. All right, so this is something, you know, I think it's interesting to get into. I told you before we went on, I don't want to get into a lot of drama, but this isn't really drama. This is kind of core for a lot of people who are kind of confused about where they are on the spectrum ideologically, or what right and left means at this point. You know, in your case, you're testifying before Congress. You're being viciously attacked by Democrats. You're being given a platform by Republicans. It gets extremely confusing. Like, well, so who's the left and who's the right? The free speech advocate is Jim Jordan, and the person going after you is Stacey Plaskett. So you said here, why I don't spend a lot of time on Republicans. You said there's an enormous army of mainstream media reporters already going after them from every angle, with most major news organizations little more than proxies for the DNC, to the point where stations hire Biden spokespeople as anchors. Do you want to elaborate on that? Because some people have pushed back and said, well, but there's a whole conservative media complex too. Do you feel that the Democrat complex is bigger or more powerful?
Oh, well, it's certainly bigger. I mean, the right-wing media. I mean, they have Fox still, which is the top cable show. And there is Fox News broadcast, but virtually the rest of the major corporate media organizations are, I guess what you would call traditional legacy media outlets. And they've kind of gone over, and this is what I wrote about in Hate Inc. years ago, is that they were starting to move in the direction of, this audience optimization model of media where you're picking your demographic and then kind of feeding it stuff that they like.
Right.
So that's been a dramatic change in the press since 2016. A lot of it is driven by economics, but yeah, I think it's true that most journalists, even if you include Fox in there and the Daily Wire and all that other stuff, there's more media horsepower being kind of aimed in the other direction than there is in the conservative direction. And that probably wasn't true as recently as, the Bush years. When you saw phenomena like MSNBC kind of going along with the march to the Iraq War.
Right.
Now it's a little different. Now the other stations are setting the tone. So I think that I also, that we've also seen polls about the political orientation of people who work at mainstream news organizations, and it's pretty overwhelming, right? Like it's 93% of the people who don't work at a Fox-like organization, they won't vote Republican, let's put it that way, right? And then you saw that Pew Center survey that talked about who the readership is for the New York Times and the listenership for NPR versus Fox. It's a complete inverse relationship. It's just that there's more of those organizations on the other side.
Well, do you think part of the perception that it's equal or more equal is that liberals code people like Joe Rogan, who I would not consider right-wing, as right-wing? So they kind of include that as part of the media. Alex Jones, Tucker Carlson, they'll kind of see that as media, which in a sense, given that people's consumption habits have changed, you could make an argument for that other than Rogan coding that way.
You could. I don't think that's true. I mean, I think Joe is probably to the left of 70% of America.
Sure.
And Tucker obviously is a big voice, and he's on X. That's absolutely true. But there are an awful lot of professional reporters. I mean, I guess this is the distinction that I'm drawing. I used to work in kind of traditional legacy media where, for instance, if you went on and you covered the presidential election and there would be a plane full of journalists, there would be a couple from Fox and a couple from conservative organizations. And then everybody else in the plane was from legacy media and worked at the Boston Globe, LA Times, all these organizations. And those people now are just overwhelmingly on one side. There are very few people who are investigative journalists, like traditional investigative journalists, who will go after both sides. Let's put it that way.
Right.
So, and then, the question of like Trump corruption, get in line. I mean, how do you find an opening that somebody hasn't done before on Trump at this point? But that's not even the main reason why it doesn't interest me. It's like I wrote a whole book about Trump. I thought he was like the most amazing character at one point in the narrative arc. The main the thing that happened to me was I was gonna do a whole monthly thing on Trump for Rolling Stone, like a big diary, like Hunter Thompson style thing. And then we ran into this problem with Russiagate where I started to have this feeling that maybe Trump's accusers were as big a story as he was. And, that was a dilemma that could not be resolved at an organization like Rolling Stone. And so, that sensation has only increased since then. I mean, now we're in a situation where we have, sort of broad attacks on constitutional rights under this sort of vague formula that like rights equals protects Trump equals bad. And I really worry about that. I think that's a bigger story than Trump. So that's kind of where I am. It's not that I like Trump or I like Republicans. I mean, I think anybody who's read anything I've written knows that. I think the other thing is a bigger story.
All right.
So it sounds like the distinction, like to crystallize that a bit, is that I think and if this is not what you mean, then please let me know. But it sounds like the prominent conservatives in the media space sort of present themselves as such, right? Tucker is an opinion guy. What you see is what you get. He's mostly right of center. And that is sort of opinion commentary. Whereas I think, and I would say you're right about this, if this is what you mean. Like I said, let me know if I don't want to put words in your mouth. But like, it seems to me like you're saying the people masquerading as objective down the middle reporters really may as well function as Democrat operatives.
Yeah, basically. I mean, and once upon a time, your best investigative journalists in the landscape were unpredictable. That was like a quality that was kind of central to, understanding who they were. I mean, Seymour Hersh, I can't tell you how many times he got in trouble for kind of going in the wrong direction or crossing colleagues. He got himself kind of quasi excommunicated for doing the CIA family jewel story in the mid 70s. There are a lot of reporters who do stories that other people don't like for political reasons, because there is a variety of journalists, and I think I hope I belong to this tradition where what interests me is whether it's a good story or not. Like, I don't really care about the politics. At some level I do, but maybe that's not something I'm going to disclose publicly. When I'm evaluating what to write about it, I think, how explosive a story is this? And that's what interests me, so the politics of it don't really matter. And I've seen the Republican Party, to me, like I wrote an obituary for the Republican Party in 2016 when Trump beat them won the Indiana primary. I don't see them as a coherent, functional, institutional power. They are maybe at the state level. But this other thing that's happened that is hard to explain and describe, but it's this kind of fusion of the Democratic Party with Bush conservatives and the intelligence community and federal enforcement bureaucracies. People talk about it as the uniparty. I think that's kind of a casual, name. I wish there was something that was more accurate, but I think there's something to it. I think, to me, it's not Democrats and Republicans. It's much more like a government bureaucracy versus a Trumpian rebellion. I think the government, the first character, is bigger, scarier, and more able.
Well, that's kind of an interesting formulation, because you're right. It does seem like everyone to the left of Mitt Romney has kind of consolidated, and then everybody to the right of Mitt Romney has kind of splintered apart, right? Because like they can't get it together on the Ukraine funding. They keep trying to swap out Speaker of the House for another one. Now they're threatening Mike Johnson. So it does seem like, on that populist right side, there's a lot less unity. And a lot of the, more centrist, what passes as centrist anyway, Republicans have sort of partnered up with the more centrist Democrats. And now, obviously, even the squad-like Democrats fall in line. You had AOC and Stephen Colbert doing a full-on Russiagate segment the other night. So it does seem like there's unity on the anti-Trump side from progressive Democrats to never Trump Republicans, whereas on the Republican side, what would really pass for actual right wing, there's not nearly as much organization.
Right. And even you can even see in the media space, I mean, in the 2000s, if you turned on Fox News, it was going to be, they were on message like 100% of the time. There was nothing that was unpredictable in conservative media at that time. Now, you know, occasionally you get some pretty interesting or weird reporting on the conservative side. There are heated disagreements, which, you know, you didn't see before. But, you know, I agree with you. I think the main split is between this cohesive, powerful, very, very disciplined Democratic Party, which has now, you know, encompassed, you know, a lot of people from the Bush world. And against that, you have Trump. Now, Trump is not an insignificant character. He has a major power base, but it's almost entirely voters. It's like 75 million pissed off people. And he just doesn't have the same institutional oomph, I don't think, that these other characters do. And that was one of the things about that was interesting about the Twitter file story to me. Like, you know, it revealed connections that I didn't really know about before, you know? So that's kind of where I'm thinking on that.
Well, that's how, and we're going to get into it a little bit more as we go. But that's how a lot of this pushback strikes me. The whole field of journalism has so become consumed by opinionating and a kind of op-ed style. People don't really know what to do with a journalist. It seems like in many areas, and I'm gonna show this later on, you went out for a while preaching the evangel of censorship and why it's a bad thing to liberals, to try to get this across to them. And you actually went to Brooklyn to communicate this. Like, does every journalist have to specialize in everything? Like, you have a beat that you've chosen, and it seems like you just drill down into this area, and it doesn't seem particularly partisan. It just is what it is.
Yeah, and I think that's another thing that, maybe it's a new feature of media that's different from when I was growing up. People kind of expect each person to be their own news service and to divvy up their coverage according to like a percentage that makes sense to them, like that's fair and all in one direction. Whereas in reality, you know, what I've mostly done my whole life is you start with some subject and your knowledge base is zero when you start, and you progressively know more and more and more about it. And as you know, you go in more directions, but you try to stay on it for as long as you can milk it for something interesting, because that process of accumulating sources and learning and all that stuff, it just takes an awful long time. So, you know, just to take an example, I got assigned to do one story about the crash in after 2008, and we got a big response. So I kept doing it, but there was so much corruption on Wall Street that I kept learning about that I ended up on that beat for almost 9 years. And I would have stayed on it, frankly, if the magazine didn't pull me off it. But you know, this situation with internet censorship is similar. It's a very, very complicated, difficult story with lots of aspects to it that are not yet revealed. We got a big lucky break with the Twitter files in the sense that we saw things that we wouldn't have known about otherwise. And, you know, I want to try to keep investigating it until I don't have any more leads to pursue. But I also, you know, I have feelings about it in terms of how, you know, that journalists and people on the left, they should care about it. And interestingly, they are starting to care about it because of Gaza, right. Which is a little bit frustrating to me. But I'll take it, you know. but that's kind of what the problem is that, you know, people, you should be worried about the principle of the thing, because you should be able to see that, you know, it's going to affect everybody eventually. So that's what I was trying to do with that story.
I think the reason why censorship has come back now that Gaza's in the headlines is because the people who were protesting for a ceasefire in the early days after October 7th actually, pardon me, posed a threat to the system. They actually threatened the narrative in a way that I think the powers that be felt was especially dangerous to the narrative that they were trying to push. And as you can see, those protesters and those left movements were very successful, to the point where now Morning Joe is railing against Israel, you know, almost every show of the past week or so. And so I think, you know, this was, to quote a conversation that Russell may quote more at length later on. You know, you said while you were doing the Twitter files, the reason you didn't uncover more censorship of the left is because the left wasn't threatening anybody. And I think since October 7th, the left has kind of got some wind at its back in terms of really influencing the public mind. And now they're getting censored.
Yeah, no, that's right. We did see in the Twitter files that there was concern and action in other countries where the left was threatening to the powers that be in countries like France, for instance, right? Like there were the Gilets jaunes, people were worried about that movement, and there was lots of traffic about what to do about that. But that whole like counter-populist narrative in the United States, it was almost entirely focused on the right.
Right.
And that wasn't, I don't think that has anything to do with intrinsically with the politics of it. It was just that it was a matter of scale and concern on the part of the authorities. Trump had been elected. There had been Brexit, stuff like that. And now you're right. Now there's another thing where, you know, the powers that be want X. They're having a problem getting it because of popular sentiment Y, so they're going to try to suppress it. And that is, you know, that's I think that's a change in the landscape. But the thing that's consistent is that it's censorship of a thing not because of issues like misinformation or harm or anything like or anything that they were claiming. It's really all about the discomfort that is raised within, you know, this sort of power structure about what's on social media and what's on conventional media as well. They want to pressure that all those folks to toe a certain line, and if that involves the left, it does, you know, and yeah, and that's what's happening now.
All right, so that brings us very well to your third point here. You kind of covered two. The Democrats' ambitions, and you got a lot of pushback on this, the Democrats' ambitions are significantly more dangerous than those of the Republicans. From digital surveillance to censorship to making intel and enforcement agencies central players in domestic governance, all plans being executed globally as well as in our one country. They are thinking on a much bigger and more dangerous scale than Republicans. I lived in third world countries, and the endless criminal indictments of people like Trump and ongoing lawfare efforts to prevent even third-party challenges are classic authoritarian symptoms. The Republicans aren't near this kind of capability. Now you got a lot of reaction, people talking about the Supreme Court obviously being in conservative hands, Republican actions against abortion rights in states that they control.
Yeah, that's true. Mm-hmm.
So on what level do you feel that the Republicans don't really have institutional power to enact their will? Because in a lot of areas, they are enacting their will, particularly through the courts and particularly in the legislatures of states they control.
Yeah, well, maybe it's because I've spent so much time on this one issue that I view it this way. But you know, I've been looking at for instance, there have been a whole slew of new legal advocacy organizations that have been lavishly funded by kind of the Reid Hoffmans and Craig Newmarks of the world. And their entire existence is to take aim at constitutional protections that they think will help Donald Trump survive politically. Just to take an example, there's this thing called the 65 Project, right? Which involves David Brock. He's the former self-confessed Republican hitman, and it's, got an army of lawyers attached to it. A lot of them used to work for the Justice Department. And the goal of the project is to file ethics complaints against every lawyer who represented Trump after the 2020 election and all of those lawsuits. Now, for me, looking at that, like, that's about 6 or 7 different things that I was taught were wrong as a young, like, Massachusetts liberal. Like, for one thing, it's like identifying the person before the crime. We're going to find an ethics complaint to file against every single one of those people. It's guilt by association. It's blaming lawyers for who the identities of their clients. And then it's also, there's this larger thing which gets to the bigger issue, which I think is more important to me, which is just discouraging people from having an attorney generally, right? It may not be exactly a Sixth Amendment violation, but to take a related case, like I interviewed somebody because of something I found in the Twitter files. I interviewed a person who was a defendant for being at January 6th and was trying to raise money for himself on one of the internet fundraising sites, ended up being discouraged from doing it thanks to a combination of pressure from USA Today and a bunch of these advocacy groups, which were full of these ex-DOJ types. Now, this is somebody who was trying to raise money for his own criminal defense, right? And we have people who used to work in the Justice Department trying to prevent that from happening. And that, to me, is really scary, right? And we see this all across the board, whether it's, the speech rights. Obviously, we saw a ton of that with the Twitter files, but then there's also stuff like the financial surveillance. It's, with the Treasury Department scanning purchase codes for things like, did this person shop at Cabela's? Did they buy Bibles? Did they go to gun shops? I don't want the government doing that kind of stuff. There's due process issues with a lot of the Trump cases. There's the very, very aggressive and proud use of extremely draconian laws like the Espionage Act and the Klan Act, against which there's very little defense, really. And there's this constant bragging about using resources to try to discourage people from defending themselves. I mean, Brock was in the 65 Project was talking about how this was going to affect the littler fish more because this is their livelihoods, and they have reputations in their communities they want to protect. That's using money and press connections to try to discourage somebody, again, from hiring a lawyer, right? And I understand that they think, and they may even be right, that these lawyers were filing frivolous lawsuits, but we depend on the system to reject those lawsuits. And we want people to have, even our worst enemies, to have good lawyers, because we don't want their convictions overturned. I mean, this is like a core liberal principle. I mean, it was something that even 5 years ago wouldn't have been controversial. And I just see this up and down the board with these efforts. It's the openness and the pride with which this is being done, that scares the hell out of me. And, you know, the Republicans, yes, they do a lot of things that are crazy and irrational. I mean, there was one of the anti-trans laws that, you know, would have given people power to report kids who, you know, showed evidence of non-traditional gender behavior or something like that.
Right.
That was a South Carolina law, I think, and that's crazy. Yeah, I agree. But the Constitution, if you succeed in hollowing that out, there's no going back. It's over at that point. You know what I'm saying?
Well, yeah. I mean, it sounds like you're making a all rights are downstream of the First Amendment argument. But didn't we also see, as soon as a war broke out involving Israel, that a lot of people who claimed to be free speech absolutists or advocates like Ben Shapiro, like Barry Weiss, all of a sudden flipped on a dime? Bill Ackman, all of these people turned around and demonstrated they're perfectly willing to be censorious if the issue is something where they feel that they want to suppress free speech.
Yeah, absolutely. But that's kind of my point, is that when anybody succeeds in kind of breaking down the constitutional protection, it's going to be misused in whatever direction later. You know, you can't count on it always being on your side. And you know, I think in the Trump context, you just see so many different things that are like precedent-setting actions that could be used in another direction incredibly easily if somebody else were to come to power. You know, this idea of, you know, this Supreme Court case now on the speech stuff, I mean, I think they're going to rule against you know, the plaintiffs, the people that I'm kind of aligned with there. And when they do that, they're going to give the government explicit permission to really go hog wild on, you know, monitoring and suppressing the internet, and all that power is going to redound to whoever wins the presidency next time, and that could be Donald Trump. And Trump, I think, has learned his lesson, you know, of not. You know, he was a little bit lazy last time and not aggressively using all the powers of the executive branch, and he's not going to make that mistake this time, which is why I think people should pay more attention to this.
Well, you know, Project 2025, there's a lot of talk about that, and I'm kind of two minds about it. On the one hand, Trump was undoubtedly thwarted by the permanent bureaucracy, the deep state. No doubt they acted against the rights of the executive to set certain policies. So there is a justification for removing these bureaucrats. But I think what we've seen is when they replace them with their own, you're just going to have the same problem with a different flavor. I think that's what we've really seen post October 7th. Yeah, and yes, they'll use the groundwork the Democrats laid down, but we'll very quickly see that our free speech allies, in many cases, you have some legitimately principled people, but I think most of them will just flip to pushing their own censorship, won't they?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I'd have to say I'm a little bit more in favor of the executive having the ability to remove people from executive branch positions. Part of that is my experience living in post-communist Russia, where, you know, the old nomenclature never really left. I mean, that's kind of there is a problem when you have a permanent bureaucracy that they're the only people who really know how to operate the machinery, and that's why they stay forever, and you know, they accrue enormous amounts of power, and that can be a problem, and that's one of the reasons why, you know, I want the presidential election to be meaningful. I want, if people have ideas about how they want, you know, there to be a change in how the CIA or the DIA or whatever operates, I'd like to be that to be a possibility. But I think the more important thing though is ending this idea of making all the civil society organizations that are designed to protect us against constitutional abuses. They've all been like absorbed by these deeply partisan organizations, and that's a real problem for me. Like, the ACLU, to which I gave money my entire life,
right,
I think was an incredibly important institution in America for a really long time, because it was willing to take on cases for everybody, even people they couldn't stand. And that created a check on power. Same thing with the media. The media has to have that same separateness, or else it's useless. And that's been a big part of my critique of sort of both left and right media, but more particularly the mainstream press, which is it's indistinguishable to me from part of the Democratic Party apparatus. Sure. And you can't have that. The press is useless if you do that. Among other things, that has no institutional authority once it does that. And that's what I worry about. I think we need, Chris Hedges wrote this book. I think it's called The Death of the Liberal Class. And it was all about the hollowing out of these institutions. And, that has a tremendously damaging effect on society when
the editor we were talking about a little bit, Yuri Berliner at NPR, just dropped an article that's making a lot of waves saying, they did this big push towards identity diversity and no push towards viewpoint diversity. So as the identities became more diverse, the viewpoints became less diverse, until now. He referenced a poll saying 3 in 10 NPR listeners find NPR trustworthy. That's the result of that. There's people who listen to it.
Right, which, and then that, what does that tell you about the percentage?
About everyone else.
All, right? I think the news organizations have long made a mistake in understanding the nature of their own power and their own profitability. In order for people to see in order for the media to be effective, it has to be seen as independent. Otherwise, people will just say, well, why am I listening to you? Why don't I just listen to, the government spokesperson, which incidentally, I think is part of the dynamic that is leading stations like MSNBC to hire Jen Psaki and Nicole Wallace, right? They figured, why don't we just cut to the chase and just, hire the person instead of pretending to be journalists?
Well, their audience already loves them.
What?
Their audience already loves them.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But over time, though, see, here's the thing. I disagree with that. Over time, what happens is, even if somebody feeds you the partisan stuff that you think you like, if they don't show some kind of independence, in a critical moment, you will see through them and you will not listen to them. I think we saw that with the conservative press when Trump ran in 2016. There was a moment where they all kind of rose as one and said, we're going to stop Donald Trump. There was a big thing in the National Review, I think, where it's like, and everyone's like, yeah, whatever, because you've been a tool for these interests for so long. Why should we listen to you now when a guy who's running and calling you people tools, is a threat to win the presidency? That's why you got to be careful about getting in bed with anybody. It's just, I mean, you know what I mean, but that's the problem. And then, the whole thing about viewpoint diversity. Yeah, absolutely. I knew that was a problem in other newsrooms as well. I heard a lot of rumblings during the Floyd protests about that. It just doesn't work if you only show people one thing over and over again. They will tune you out eventually.
So your final point here was, last and most important, the Democrats are being organized around a more potent but also much dumber, more cult-like ideology. People like Yuval Harari and his transhumanist divinity concept scare me a lot more than the Republicans, and I was once undercover in an apocalyptic church in Texas. Ask your average Russian or Cuban what overempowered pseudo-intellectuals are capable of. I have a pretty good record of picking dangerous phenomena ahead of time. I feel confident on this one, and that's before we get to the demographic class shifts in the parties. All right, so do you want to expound on that a little bit? You kind of touched on that a little when we were talking about Elon Musk. You were talking about these weird, culty, techno, spiritual cults in, I guess, the state I'm in right now. So
I mean, I probably could have expressed that one a little bit better. I probably shouldn't have picked Harari. I shouldn't even mentioned him because he's too eclectic and weird an example. But there is this like utterly materialist view of the world that has, this is a sort of binary view of everything, reducing everything to a power contest. Everything from family to sex to history, like nothing matters except, the history that started 10 minutes ago. We don't have to pay attention to the lessons of art or religion or spirituality or anything like that. There's no heat. There are no mysteries. One of the reasons I picked Harari is because, he's into this idea that everything can be sort of scientifically determined, and we'll just arrive at conclusions by working them through. Whereas I grew up believing that there are things that human beings will never understand, like the Greeks thousands of years ago were writing about the fact that no matter what we do, we just kind of can't escape our fate. There are elements of the human condition that are kind of immutable, and they're both tragic and comic at the same time. And that's a much deeper, richer concept that they were talking about a long time ago. Then we can just sort of scientifically determine everything, and we saw this with the Twitter files. Being able to algorithmically decide what's true and what's false, where the reality is truth is this very, very difficult, elusive concept that's like a moving target, and that's why we've always been so careful with it in journalism. I don't know. I'm not explaining myself very well.
No. I think you're partly talking about kind of the postmodern turn, as you might call it, and the irony of it. What often strikes me is, look, if you've got a brand name that has a lot of power, people will latch onto it to sell their agenda. So a lot of anti-science people push their agenda in the name of science because science has a good name. It has a lot of credibility.
Right.
So they call it scientific, even though it's really anti-scientific. I mean, their underlying philosophy is that the people in power construct reality, right? So they don't actually believe in science, but they know the term science has a lot of power with the people. So they'll say they'll lean on somebody who needs a grant to keep their position at the university, and they'll get them to write something that's what they want, and then they'll reference it.
And you just said something that really freaks me out, is this whole idea of like whoever's in power gets to create their own reality, and we can kind of force that to be true. And I worry about that a lot, right? There's a lack of humility, intellectual humility, that's kind of built into that mindset. It's also a little bit immature, I mean, I saw this a lot, frankly, when I was in the Soviet Union. I was a student there. I had, teachers who had this very sort of childlike idea of how the world worked that was based on silly Marxist textbooks that they read. Now, that's not the same as what's going on in postmodernist America, but there's a little bit that's similar. It's this like sort of very, very simplistic materialist view of the world. And among other things, I just feel, I feel like people are robbing themselves of something that's really beautiful about being people, which is that, the world is this great and amazing mystery. And But those people shouldn't be making political decisions, because that's not a good basis for making weighty decisions. Also, there's also within that, there's an enormous cliquish, cultish vibe to politics now,
right?
Where if you see, for instance, within media, and again, the irony of this being that it's somehow less true on the right side now, whereas it was the opposite a little while ago. Everybody has like the same complement of ideas. It's like a starter kit they all get. They all agree on everything. They believe in exactly the same things. Anybody who doesn't believe any part of it is not an ally.
Yeah,
right. And then as soon as they see somebody who's kind of speaking out, that person is sort of descended upon like a contagion, and that's how they view what we used to call the process of debate is let's attack the unclean thing. And we see that in lots of cases, including my own, frankly. I mean, people are just, they see me as somebody who codes as a right winger because I'm just not part of the club, or I don't want to be in it. And that's weird, but it's also very unhealthy, I think.
Well, as soon as you stopped singing from the hymnal, you started to get that, but no more so than now. That was like a perfect segue, Matt. So Zaid Jilani hit you with this, and I really want to ask you about this because this is very interesting being in this space. You're just rationalizing pandering to the millions right-wing subscribers give you. There are millions of people without health care in the American South because of GOP Medicaid blockade, but not as important as libs of TikTok censorship. Notice how Matt keeps saying, I covered this thing in the past. That's exactly what I'm saying. He stopped covering these beats to pander to his new audience that made him a millionaire. He doesn't touch Palestine for the same reason, despite writing about it previously. The fact he has an overwhelmingly right-wing readership means it's even more valuable for him to cover something besides right-wing beats, but he is going the easy route, the one that makes him money. Now, I have to ask, as somebody who subscribed to you before I even had a show, I'm not aware of being right-wing, I guess for the same reasons you get called that. I'd get called that probably by the same people for similar reasons, but within a reasonable definition, because he seems very confident in this, as if there's been some kind of a study of your readership. Where is that coming from exactly, that your readership is overwhelmingly right-wing?
It's extremely frustrating because there are some conservatives among my readers.
I would hope.
But I think overwhelmingly, and this is odd because your readership changes over the years, but I have a lot of sort of aging hippies who are among my readership now.
What are you saying about me, Matt?
I don't consider you aging. But no, I mean, I think the people who subscribe to my site are kind of all over the place politically. There's a lot of the most common thing I hear is I feel politically homeless, right? Right. And that's why I'm here.
Very much like Jimmy's audience. Very similar.
Yeah, I mean, and probably Rogan's too is probably a little bit that way. But even there, I mean, I like Zed. He used to be kind of a friend of mine, but there's just a whole bunch of things there that are frustrating that he said. I mean, like, if you go back and look, I covered the whole healthcare debate when Obama got elected and they were going to do the healthcare plan. And my recollection is that one of the reasons we don't have single payer healthcare is because the Obama White House did a backroom deal with pharma and sold out the main provisions of the healthcare plan in exchange for $150 million in publicity money. These stories are all extremely complicated. Like, this simplistic idea.
Well, and they not to cut you off, they leaned on Kucinich to flip his vote for single payer rather than Lieberman.
Right. That's right. I forgot about that. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and there was all kinds of stuff that went on back then, and look, Billy Tozen, helping pass the prescription drug benefit bill, and then going 2 weeks later and taking a $2 million a year job heading pharma. I mean, there's a million things where the Democrats were complicit in this. The Republicans absolutely have complicity in this. But one of the things that frustrates me about a lot of this stuff is that, how do I put this? When we go to most of us who come in who are in media, we're the products of kind of expensive colleges where there's sort of similar ideologies, and we're taught to sort of shorthand what the parties stand for, right? So, Republicans equal silent majority, equal grievance politics, equal racism, Democrats equal New Deal, equal, social programming equals good. And that's a simplistic view of how things are. Democrats help the poor, Republicans hate the poor. But then when you drill down to it on, the micro level, you start to find out that there's all kinds of complications and things that aren't exactly as you think. And so, this idea of, oh, you're enabling all the people who hate the poor and doing damage to people who help the poor. I don't see it that way at all. I find the Democrats scarier and more interesting in the moment. And I've spent a long time in my career writing about the Republicans when they mattered. I just don't think they matter as much now.
Well, those kind of siloed sort of attitudes that you just described, I think they fester in sort of homogeneous ideological spaces. And I think, like, your readership, I would imagine, Glenn Greenwald's readership, even this show, right? We are filling in for Jimmy, who gets called right-wing a lot. I don't consider Jimmy right-wing at all. And, he just had a live show where he had a MAGA guy and a Marxist sort of get into what almost turned into a fight, and they ended up
awesome,
like hugging it out at the end, because they kind of realized that a lot of those like preconceived notions about where their politics are weren't exactly as described to them by the media. And so I think these sort of heterodox spaces are important. I think creators who nurture those kinds of environments should be proud of that. They shouldn't shy away from that. And I think, your readership is a good example of that as well. What would you say to that?
Well, first of all, I totally agree with you. But more importantly, that's what the media used to kind of be for, right? It used to be our job to know that the world isn't, a pair of simplistic caricatures, that things are more difficult than that. And so we don't lean into good, bad, black, white views of the world. And, it's disappointing when you see journalists doing that, because that's the job of a politician.
Right.
My belief is that a journalist, even if they strongly love one party over the other, you should be a little bit unsure about what their political views are. For a couple of reasons. Number one, that gives them credibility to write about all sorts of topics. There's also the fact that when you do that, when you don't announce yourself as a partisan, it makes it possible for other kinds of sources to approach you, because they might know that you'll get a good reception no matter what their beliefs are. So people, I don't know. But you're right. I think that those homogenous spaces, I guess what I'm saying is the media used to not be that kind of homogenous space, and now it is. No.
Right.
All right. So let's get to the Friday night fights here. So I went back. So you had a little dust up with Bree this week, for which I don't know if you'll take any joy in the fact that she's been ratioed pretty hard on the segment. that inspired this. So I went back and looked at the original interview from last year because I wanted to see, because a lot of claims were being made in the Rising appearance that you had this week. And a lot was forgotten. For example, she actually said she didn't question your integrity. She said that up top. That seems to have changed, frankly. She said the Twitter files were newsworthy. She said she absolutely would have worked on the Twitter files if she had the opportunity. You mentioned that because she I think continues to build a case around maybe you were given selective files. You at one point talked about how you were given the entire Slack channel of certain executives where every message was in there. And you also said you were given an entire laptop that wasn't vetted by a lawyer. But the main point that you made was, hey, okay, so I have limited time. You didn't say it quite this way, but you basically said I'm dealing with a flaky billionaire, and I don't know what he's going to do day to day, so I need to move quick. And so I looked at the FBI messages, and what was there was there. Because I thought, well, that's the most likely to bear fruit. Now, throughout the interview, very famously, she didn't really like that answer, and she kept trying to find some kind of bias, even though right here, and she seems to have forgotten this, she admitted what she would have done and that it would have reflected her own bias. So let's take a look at that.
So for me, I also wouldn't be prioritizing Trump. If I'm going to be fully honest, my first search words would be Bernie, socialism, Bernie Bro. I would go through all of my Twitter people who I know have claimed to be shadow banned and blocked and had their accounts taken down over the years. And I would go through, I would look for requests for Hillary Clinton and some of the pedophile disclosures about what journalists they thought were friendly and all this kind of stuff. And that's what I would be searching for, because that's my priority. I'm not saying it's the most important thing in the world. I'm not saying it's more important than what you've been searching about in terms of FBI interference. It probably is not. So I acknowledge that. I accept that. I have no problem with that. But it needs to be, I think, foregrounded. That this is not a comprehensive search, that I'm not looking through everything, that I don't have the ability to look through it because, frankly, I'm being limited, not necessarily nefariously. I'm not saying it's because of Elon Musk, I
don't know that I'm being limited.
But you just told us that you're being limited, that you feel like you can't ultimately make an unlimited number of search requests.
I'm being judicious about what I ask for. Let's put it that way.
But why? Because you feel like there's only so many requests that you can make?
Maybe. You never know. I don't know. I don't know. I don't own the company. I don't control this situation.
So were you told that this is very expensive and difficult to do these requests? So this isn't a bonanza. This isn't a free for all.
No, but I've been doing this job for a long time, and I know that things change with sources, and you never know what the situation is going to be tomorrow. You have to act as quickly as you can to get the story that you can as fast as you can.
All right, now that seems clear enough. What part of this do you think Brianna seems to still not understand? I don't know why this conversation is still happening.
Yeah, I mean, I think she was under some kind of misconception about maybe the process. Even just a couple of days ago, I saw her tweeting something to the effect of, somebody with the Twitter file should.
We're going to get to that. Yeah.
Yeah. Access to. And, in the moment, there were all sorts of things. If I had a list of things that I could have examined, and carte blanche to do it forever, I of course would have gotten to it. There was a lot of stuff, for instance, that I guessed was probably being done more at the algorithmic level, like the Palestinian stuff, at that time. Now it's probably being done more actively at a higher level. But that would have been a whole new set of searches. The process for me was we got those laptops, we got to look at some Slacks, and we saw some names and some entries and some acronyms that we immediately knew were meaningful. And we kind of huddled up. And by the way, as soon as I saw FBI DHS and ODNI, the first thing I said to everybody is this thing is temporary. Like, it's not going to go, it's going to get shut down somewhere, right? So let's get as much as we can. And we just focused on the stuff that we already had leads on. And I understand the frustration of, like, I would have liked to have found out what happened with Bernie. But it was also frustrating that, you know, we'll get to the show, I guess the later show, but that interview was very frustrating to me because I felt like she was trying to get me to admit that I was doing something unethical, or that the situation was unethical, or that there was something wrong with what we were doing, when the reality was it was just a very unique, odd, set of circumstances where the only thing you can do is the best you can, right? And we came up with a process and did it, and hopefully, you know, I think it had some impact, but she just wasn't happy with it for whatever reason, and to this day I don't really understand. She's still angry about it, which I don't.
She's. I mean, at this point, this is becoming her white whale. It's just.
I personally would have liked for you to have searched for how Wendy's decides what menu items go on the 2 for $6 month. Because some months they do it a fantastic. You got the spicy chicken sandwiches there. You got the double hamburgers. But then other months it's like a glorified like $1 menu. You know,
there's probably something about that in there.
There's probably something in there.
I would like to see you focus on that more if it's not, you know, too much trouble.
But
that's just me. That's my subjective bias showing.
Isn't this kind of where all of this comes together? Because it seems like this is a conflict between a partisan commentator's idea of journalism and a journalist's idea of journalism, which she essentially concedes. She says if she had been set loose on that, presumably, you could answer this better, she never would have found what you found about this entire network of censorship, NGOs, supposed NGOs that are actually acting as cutouts for the government, because she would have been busy going down the rabbit hole of how it affected her personal political project and biases, which she admits right there. That's why I don't know why she's still talking about this.
Well, she was referencing a time, and Matt, you mentioned this in the interview. This was a time when the left posed no threats
we'll get
to anybody, because Bernie had
that.
Folded. Like, if you were to do a search now, right, would you search ADL? You know, would you search APAC? Because they're the ones behind a lot of the censorship now. I imagine you would. You want to answer that?
Yeah, I mean, I would, absolutely. We worked kind of in another way, though. I mean, like, the only time we started off with a topic was the first time. And that was the Hunter Biden thing.
Right, that was a specific story, right?
That was a specific story, and we did that because it was a known instance of censorship, and I thought we might find something, and we didn't, obviously, because it was being vetted by former FBI general counsel, and that was it was interesting, but it was not great, right? But then when we got the sort of big pile of random stuff that we didn't understand, that's when you start making all the logistical calculations, like, okay, am I going to do searches for other things in the hope of finding it? Or am I going to drill down into what looks like an interesting exchange, but I don't really understand what it is yet? And I picked the second course, and that that's when we found out what the Election Integrity Partnership was. And we didn't know where it was run out of, or who was doing it, or how the bureaucracy worked. But we had some kind of general idea that there was this bureaucracy that was making recommendations about election-related posts. And I thought, okay, this is day 2 of the thing. This is already interesting. We're seeing the FBI mentioned in conjunction with that, Let's just go for that. Let's lean into that and see and find out as much as we can about that. And that's also where, she's talking about, were you told you couldn't look into it? I already had a pretty good idea at that point that Elon was flaky, as you say, right? And he was impetuous, and he had a history of making sudden decisions, including, by the way, the Twitter files. Right?
When you were on our show, you said you thought he had multiple personality disorder.
Yeah, well,
it was like a different person every day. Yeah.
After that book came out, I thought, well, that makes sense. But with all those things that were pressures, I was just thinking we have to come out of here with something, or else this is going to be a massive failure. And so I wasn't even thinking about specific issues at that point. I just wanted to come out with something that we could report. And it's two different ways of looking at the world. I understand what she's thinking, but maybe if you'd done it the other way, you might have come out with nothing at all.
Right.
And what's the value of that?
All right. So let's take a look at this clip. A lot of people have probably seen. This is when this really comes to a head about left censorship that's not being turned up in your searches, and the question of whether you're being given selective information.
Like when I see conservative sites talking about this, sometimes it's like the FBI is doing this and that and the other, but oftentimes there's this far-ranging anti-right-wing bias, which I don't have a problem with, except for I think that the story is there is an establishment bias against more fringe populist parts that include, yes, the right, but also the left. It's a nuanced point, but I think that it's important.
But the reason you're seeing more of this against the right than the left is that the left is toothless and no threat to anybody, whereas the right is actually scary to the national security establishment because of Brexit, because of Trump, and because of other things.
If that's true, Matt, why is it that 85% of all FBI action, FBI activity has been historically focused on the left? I'm not talking about the right now contemporary. Yes.
Okay, well, I'm not looking at 1970. I'm looking at 2015 on.
That's fine, but Matt, we just all saw Bernie wins Nevada, and next day on MSNBC, it's Bernie's in talks with Putin, and he's going to cut people's heads off in Central Park.
I'd love to get that story. I would love to get, but is that on Twitter? I don't know. I've certainly looked for it.
Tell me.
Okay, all right, so. Do you think that's on Twitter? Like, do you, at this point, do you feel you were given selective information? Do you feel if you were able to poke around more, unlimited, pull on every thread, do you think you'd find that?
I don't. My guess is that they may have called a few things, but it seemed like whenever I had a suspicion that some kind of search return was light, it felt like they were taking out privileged information about the company that they might be sued over. And, but I didn't have any proof of that. There was one instance I remember where there was an attachment that was missing from an email, but it was about something kind of inconsequential. So, at least in the email, it looked like. But I don't think so. I mean, the turnover times were really fast. And I think from what I gathered from their whole response, they were happy with what we were doing, generally. I don't really think that they were trying to push us in one direction or another. And by the way, I did find stuff about censorship of the left, right? It wasn't so much about the United States, but I did look for it in all the materials that we had, and I looked and I found censorship of Democrats in 2020. And made sure to publish examples of that. But
that was what Consortium News and the NewsGuard story is more recent, right?
Yeah, the NewsGuard story is more recent, but even in the Twitter files, one of the first ones we did, like there was an example where there was some woman with a low follower account in Arizona who made some kind of joke about Republicans on election day or something like that. And, you know, it was taken down after a recommendation by EIP, and she was a Democrat. And I called her up. She was if I remember correctly, she was a PhD, or there was a PhD in her title. But I was looking for Democrats, because I wanted to make the point that this was not all happening in one direction. Right. And they couldn't have done it in such a way that we only saw censorship of the right, because so much of what we got were these gigantic spreadsheets full of names where they would have had to painstakingly go through and take things out, and even do searches to find out who those people were. So it would have taken forever to do that. I just don't think they did a lot of that.
Okay. All right. So here you went on Rising to address some claims that Brianna made about you having withheld information about Elon and your dealings with Elon, which you took serious exception to. Now, we've been very curious, because I don't think you'll take offense if I say, because you said it on our show, Mehdi Hassan kind of rolled you, right? But this was a very different Matt Taibbi. This was like the end of the Rocky III montage. Matt Taibbi. So did you run up some steps before this interview? Like how?
That's funny. I just did that with my kids last week in Philadelphia.
In Philadelphia?
Yeah. We took a trip to Philadelphia, but not.
Well, there you go. That answers the question.
That's it.
Yeah,
you did do it.
That is really funny, actually.
All right.
No, I mean, in the case of Mehdi, he just got me. I wasn't prepared at what, you know. There were things that I didn't know about, so I didn't know how to answer. And here, I did know.
Yeah, I had a better idea what was coming.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
All right, so let's take a look.
It's not. And I think what would be clarifying is to have some insight into what you meant by decline to criticize you. Because that seems to me to be where the bulk of the
No, that seems to be what you want to talk about. But let's just be clear. I'll be done with this in 18 seconds. Okay, just to be clear, you made factual mistakes about when I revealed that I was being censored. You made a mistake in saying that I still haven't criticized them. I haven't criticized them over the last year. You made a mistake in saying the Twitter file searches were not done. You made a mistake in saying that there was one cache. I don't know where you got that from.
It was a mistake, baby. I have no interest in denying that. But I would like to talk about that a little bit, though, because when you came online,
there's more.
Okay.
Look,
go ahead. We had you on because we wanted to make sure we get to all of this.
I would have been happy with a correction, but since you're not going to do that, okay. The other two were you.
All right, I'm really trying not to play to the drama here, but there's a little more of this. I don't know how you keep it cool, man. Like, okay, so all of the smears, I'm not interested in litigating that. And you're kind of being silly and overly confrontational to insist on defending your reputation against my uninformed smears, which I'm conceding are uninformed smears, but you're being ridiculous to spend time on them.
I mean, it's a clever strategy. It seemed like it didn't work with her viewers, but
no, it did not.
No, I mean, it's insulting. If they were inconsequential mistakes, I probably wouldn't have said anything. But for instance, the idea that, she said that, it was my understanding that the Twitter file searches were already done, that there was only one cache. Now, the implication of that is that I was withholding criticism of Elon Musk over a story I wasn't even getting at that point. Right. And that led into this other comment she made about maybe there was something else that was going on. I had to make the point that no, right until the very end, I was waiting for results and I would have done anything to get more of them. But, she sort of waved that off as if it's inconsequential. Same thing with the whole idea of, not telling people about the censorship. as if that's a minor mistake. That's a big mistake. That's if I had withheld that, it would have been a big deal, and I didn't. And by the way, that's a fine line too. Like, you don't like to go after your sources, but I kind of had to in that situation. So it was very frustrating. And I've run into some other journalists who seem to be a little bit cavalier about the whole idea of making errors and how it's not that big of a deal. And I don't understand where that comes from. Before I did a story, and to this day, you lie awake at night before you publish it, and you worry because the worst thing you can do is screw up and give somebody like Mehdi Hassan an opportunity to kill you on the air, in addition to hurting somebody, which can happen. So I don't understand that.
All right, let's take a look at the rest of it.
We're saying that essentially that I had done searches only for one side and not the other.
Well, Matt, let's talk about that, because I didn't say you had done searches for one side or than the other. I said I had you on my show, and you got very bristly with me at that time as well. I wish we could have these conversations without them turning into these weird personal vendettas. I think we'd have a lot more productivity in the space if we did.
Let's not have
but
any
wait a minute.
vendetta.
Yeah. So let me stab you. Don't get a Band-Aid. I mean that's how I hear that. Like, how dare you defend yourself against these smears? And you've written about this, how journalists used to be terrified to get something wrong. It could be the end of your career. And again, I'm seeing the difference between somebody who makes a living offering opinions and somebody who is an actual journalist.
Yeah, or was trained as one, right? I mean, and like that sequence, I should have been better prepared for that, because she said that she didn't say the thing that I claimed, and if I had the quote there, I could have read it out to her. I mean, she did say that, if it were me, I would do a word search that's broader than just search terms that are associated with attacks on the right. And so, that's another thing that I had never seen before, which is this whole, let's answer an accusation of an error with another error. It's hard to contend with that in the moment, right? You have to really be difficult about it.
Right.
But that's part of the whole ball game now. And I don't understand it. Like the downside feels to me to be small when you say to your audience, I got some things wrong in this last piece. And I'm sorry, I apologize to X, and then it's over, and your audience then trusts you to be right every time going forward. But it's fighting to the end, and there's an implication that whose side you're on and where you fall on the political issue is more important than that. And maybe to modern audiences it is. I don't know. It's just different.
I don't think it is, because if it were, people like Rogan, who have more heterodox kinds of opinions, wouldn't be the most popular podcast. That wouldn't be the most popular podcast if that's what people really wanted. I think part of his success is that they find it a relief from that monoculture. So, not content to let it go, he responded to somebody here who, under Elon, your Twitter files were under Dorsey. Under Elon said, Twitter, there's Free Palestine, Free Gaza account. Twitter shadow banned me and took 10,000 followers away from me during the course of a week. And it was probably more than that, because I was gaining followers as Twitter took them away. Brianna says, someone with access to Twitter files should really look into this. I'm just stunned by the level of ignorance that reflects, because I'm not a journalist. I'm an opinionator. The problem with this formulation is very obvious to me.
Right, I don't have the stuff.
Clearly you're being implied given the timing, how would you get this? Like, how does this reflect on you?
I don't know. And I saw that, and I actually had a hard time for a good minute or so trying to figure out what the point was. But I think, sort of vaguely, it's just I was in league with Elon Musk on some level, and therefore I bear responsibility for this somehow, or all of us do. And so gotcha. I guess. I don't know. I tried to explain to her that, that relationship between, with sources, it's like, it's politically neutral. Like I don't, yes, he's giving me information, but that doesn't mean that I approve of everything that he says. But anyway, it was weird.
Well, I mean, I think the big difference between...
Kate has got an interesting take on this.
Well, yeah, because I think the difference between Brianna and someone like a Joe Rogan is that she, first of all, has a law background. Lawyers get paid to win and never give up the case, never abandon the point of view that you get paid to represent. And also, she worked on those Bernie campaigns. So, she was really in the trenches. And I think she's very competitive. And I think she feels very compelled to advocate her side. And I think, that's a different background than the one that you come out of. I also think that very competitive streak probably blinds her to the fact at the time. And again, this is a lot less true now post October 7th, but 2023 was this kind of weird time to be on the left. I mean, she thinks of herself as on the left. She is on the left. I think of myself as on the left. And, the first 10 months of that year were this kind of strange time where you didn't really know what it meant to be on the left. And I think October 7th really kind of brought that into very clear view for me. It reminded me of why I'm on the left, because it was left activists who were in the streets protesting for a ceasefire. And so being on the left really meant something post October 7th. Whereas that year before, again, you couldn't really see where the left was going. I mean, the left was most obsessed with, unisex, gender neutral bathrooms than they were anything that actually threatened power. And I think coming out of a Bernie Sanders campaign where you really felt like you were in it to win it, going into this post-Bernie world where not only is there no left momentum anywhere. I mean, they couldn't even pass paid family leave through the House, or not through the House. Sorry, through the Senate. Then it became this thing where not only does the left have no power, but because the left has no power, they're arguing over these very niche sort of boutique sort of cultural issues. They're not relevant enough to be censored. And I think she had a very hard time just accepting that. And I think partly that's because she has a law background. You get paid to stick with an argument, and just double and triple down no matter what. And B, she was in the campaign. So I think, when you're in the campaign and you're battling every day, that becomes a big part of how you operate moving forward. So that's how I think of it.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. Also, Elon Musk is probably the, exhibit A of what Bernie is against, right? His whole campaign was built around billionaires with spotty labor records, and this idea of taking information from somebody like that, or even being civil to somebody like that, even in a utilitarian way, which is exactly what that relationship was. She felt like there was something wrong with it.
Yeah, but isn't that a funny exception for somebody who works for The Hill, which fired Katie Halper for taking a stand that she fully endorses to take?
Well, yes. I thought about bringing that up, but didn't want to do that. I mean, look, I like Bree. I mean, we've always gotten along prior to the Twitter files, and that was the reason. I was super paranoid during the Twitter files, especially in that first month, and that was one of the reasons why I agreed to do that bad faith interview, is because I liked her, and I didn't think it was going to turn into something that was going to be very difficult to navigate. Not that you expect softballs, but most of the time, like a reporter knows that there are going to be certain things you can't really talk about, and you do the interview around that. You find other challenging questions to ask, but there are certain things you can't say. But she just seemed very personally offended by the whole thing, and I think that was true of a lot of people on the left. Like for instance, she asked, "What about the Twitter files was important to the left?" And what she meant by that was like specific people who had been censored, but really the whole concept should have been important to the left. Right?
Of course.
Censorship is by definition important to the left. Yeah.
Right. I mean, and it would have been, not that long ago. So I thought that was odd. The whole thing was odd.
Well, if it's any comfort, now this is not selective. This is, you're hard pressed to find a positive response on that tweet. So this is from Postoopolis. What's with your hate boner for Matt Taibbi? When you see the world as top versus bottom instead of left versus right, and understand we are ruled by an oligarchy duopoly, complaining about not defending the left enough seems silly and moot. This is from Kevin Westbrook. You should investigate X to find out what's going on. The access that people had originally was cut off. Matt Taibbi is shadow banned on this platform. Red-pilled leftist says what Keaton always says, just take the L and move on. And finally, Andy, cringe double dip here, Bree. You should actually be apologizing to Matt Taibbi. So I hope that's some comfort after that dust up. I know you don't like those kinds of situations. Some people feed on it, but you're pretty mellow, non-confrontational guy from what I've seen.
Yeah,
that's actually going to be on my headstone. Took the L, moved on. When I go.
Took the L, moved on. I like that.
Yeah.
I had a book once of last words, which was like the funniest book I ever had. I always think of Oscar Wilde, which was apparently his last words were either this wallpaper goes or I do. I just think it's amazing. So.
I think, is it Jack Benny's tombstone that says "I'll be right back," or is that Johnny Carson?
Right, yeah, that's one of those.
Yeah.
Exactly.
All right, so to wrap up on a positive note, and also to show people, okay, so as I said earlier, Matt has a beat. Every reporter cannot be everything to everyone and cover every subject. Opinionators kind of do that. That's what we do. We look at the news of the day and we try to cover a broad spread. I was actually talking to somebody about this the other night. I said, yeah, I mean, I almost couldn't really be a journalist and do what we do because that's a discipline. You've got to spend time going into records and going into dusty courthouses. I can't be looking at the day's headlines and being ready to offer an opinion about it and do that at the same time. It's two completely different things. So just to show you, this is what Matt has been doing. He has gone around to the liberals to try to preach the evangel of what he has found in the Twitter files, and he's rather relentless about it, both in his writing and in his pursuits. This was the Montauk Club, very famous. Now it's a public space, but it used to be one of these 19th century men's clubs in Brooklyn. And I had the opportunity to go out there and see Matt at work. So this is my own footage.
CISA, if you don't know, is the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. They're going to be one of the stars of this presentation, unfortunately. It's a division of the Department of Homeland Security. They were very intimately involved with a number of different programs that we'll get to. But that's the reality, and this is something that I always try to bring up, especially with sort of independent-minded or democratic-minded audiences, because this is the same kind of corporate versus independent dichotomy that was a huge issue in the financial services story that I covered, where big banks get bailed out, they get to do whatever they want, and small regional banks got paid the piper after 2008. It's the same thing with this issue.
All right, so there you are in Brooklyn, and I remember you billed this as going into the heart of the kind of liberal consensus, come at me. And actually, other than the guy who starts screaming
who's the
insanely,
performance artist?
yeah, the performance artist in the back. Other than that, people were very open to what you were saying. You're going there to the left, which, you know, at core are your people. I think like many people who feel politically homeless, they say, well, you know, I mean, 10 minutes ago, I was considered a leftist.
Right. Yeah. No. And I mean, it was really cool that was a really cool talk. And by the way, thank you for coming out. That was awesome.
Thank you. It was great.
And, you know, I was actually very heartened after that because, you know, there were lots of people who were interested in it, and it felt, you know, like there were people who still cared about the issue. My sense is that people do still care about this issue. It's just that it's kind of assiduously kept off certain kinds of media and attacked, you know, in places like the Washington Post or 60 Minutes or NBC or whatever it is. But I don't think ordinary people really think like that. I mean,
right.
I don't know. What do you think? But my guess is no, right? Like most people don't like the idea of censorship, I don't think. So that's what I was trying to put.
Yeah, I think it's a very small subsection of overly online and overly corporate media imbibing people. The problem is the reason they have such power in the discourse, they vote. They vote.
Right.
They vote in disproportionately great numbers. I had somebody the other day talking about, you know, what was wrong with the Trump people, and he described himself as a politics junkie. I said, you're not a politics junkie, you're a corporate news junkie. That's not the same thing. That's not the same thing. But these corporate news junkies, they vote, man. That's it. That's their heroin. You know, I mean, Hunter, you mentioned Hunter Thompson, he wrote a little bit about that, how for a lot of people, politics is like a drug. It's like a drug addiction.
He talked about that. He had given up drugs and went into politics. He needed politics and big fires in his life. Right. I remember that. That was really funny. But yeah, no, I think for a lot of people, getting that dopamine hit of, you know, turning on MSNBC and getting that rush of I hate this, I hate that. It is a thing, but it's difficult to penetrate. So you're right. But also, there's also another problem, which is that the people who go into government and work in Congress and work at big academic institutions, the pro-censorship folks are massively overrepresented in those places. Right. And that's kind of the problem.
Right. All right.
Is it all right if I ask one very brief thing before we wrap? Because I think the Jimmy Dore Show audience would be very interested in this. Because I remember when you left the Useful Idiots podcast, you said it was to work on a book. And the subject of the book, as I recall, was going to be about COVID and the upward transfer of wealth during COVID, how corporations basically looted the country under the pretext of a public health response. And then obviously we know that the Twitter Files project kind of fell in your lap. And so obviously that book, I'm assuming, was backburner for that reason. Do you have any plans to write that now that that project is gone?
No, I did start it, and you know, I did do some traveling about it. Oddly enough, today on my site there's an interview with this guy Les Leopold, who wrote a book, Wall Street's War on Workers, where he's talking about one of the things.
Yeah, you're presenting that as kind of the antidote to what was the lib book that they were all titter about?
White Rural Rage.
White Rural Rage.
It's really like the racist shitheads out there, but the title they settled on was White Rural Rage. But one of the things that the first chapter of that book was going to be about the use of CARES Act money to spending that on stock buybacks, which led to layoffs. And so I maybe at some point I'll make some features out of it. But no, I know I probably won't be able to do that book. As you say, it just, I have to maintain a site now too. And that's a lot of work. It's tough to write a book like that and do, create content at any kind of rate. So, but that is a very rich topic, and I hope somebody does do it, because there was an awful lot of stealing going on.
Well, send it to me. I'll publish it under my name. I'll give you half. Send me what you got. I'll finish it, and we'll work something out. We'll talk numbers.
Excellent.
And you actually reminded me. So briefly, there's another question the Jimmy Dore audience would love, and thank you for being so generous with your time, Matt. You said at the event in Brooklyn that there are 7 people in the media that everyone knows are CIA cutouts, and everyone basically knows who they are. And you said when you see a headline, you know it was one of the 7 when one of them wrote it. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, I don't want to get myself sued, so I'll have to talk around this a little bit.
But what was it you were saying about Nicole Wallace? No.
Yeah, I don't want to get sued, but yeah, Joe Scarborough.
But here's what I would recommend for folks. As a tool for reading the news, when you see new information that is leaked anonymously, that is attributed up top to anonymous sources, and then somewhere further down in the article, there is an on-the-record quote from a CIA official, or let's just say a DIA official, something like that. Like if there's an intelligence official who's quoted on the record somewhere, but then the people who are actually giving the information are anonymous up top, and consistently over and over again, things like leaks of signals intelligence, that are broken in a newspaper, which by the way is illegal. They're not allowed to do that. It's like one of the few things that you can't do legally. Even journalists can't do that. When you see over and over again that they're going to the same reporters, you should take note of that. Those relationships are interesting. Maybe they take different forms, but there are a couple of names. If you ask Glenn Greenwald about this, he's
in Brazil. He doesn't care about getting sued.
Yeah, he'll say the same thing. There's a few, and each one of the big intelligence officials kind of has their own favorite reporters, and it's not that hard to figure out who they are. So I think that's the easiest way I can put that. The Times, the Washington Post, and a couple of other organizations have a couple of those folks on their staffs, and you could just say that they're well sourced.
Yeah, that's one way to put it.
All right, Matt. Thank you very much. We always promise you like 20 minutes and go 2 hours.
No, it's all right. I really appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you. And where can people find you?
At racket.news. I got my own neon now. Isn't that awesome?
I saw that. Major upgrade.
Yeah. Racket.news on Substack, and America This Week, which is also on the same site with Walter Kern. And thanks for having me on.
All right. Thank you very much, Matt.
All right. Good luck, Russ.
Thank you, brother.
Cool.
All right. To you.
All right. Put the YouTube, I put the Rumble link in the YouTube chat. So click that, and we'll see you in a couple minutes. All right, bye, and be back.
On a scale of 1 to 10, how much do you hate shitty coffee? I, for one, really hate shitty coffee, which is why I'm excited to introduce to you a company that's revolting against shitty coffee, and it's called the 1775 Coffee Company. Now, I haven't had it yet because I only drink decaf. Steph has had it. Steph, how do you like it?
I really like it. You know what? I have a French press, and so I've been using my French press and totally enjoying it. It's delicious. It's smooth. So
1775, the world awakened to a new era. And now it's 1775 Coffee Company is bringing you a coffee that embodies that revolutionary spirit. Crafted with passion and precision, our beans are ethically and exclusively sourced from the finest coffee beans farms of Bolivia. Didn't know that. 1775 Coffee Company's farm-to-cup journey ensures the highest quality of authenticity and sustainability from start to finish. With each sip, your palate will recognize and appreciate the dedication and passion that goes into crafting this single-sourced brew. 1775 Coffee Company takes pride in offering customers a truly exceptional coffee experience with their premium coffee collection. But their dedication to this revolution extends beyond the realm of taste. Safeguarding freedom of speech is critical right now, which is why 1775 Coffee Company has joined forces with Rumble in defense of one of our most fundamental rights, freedom of speech. Coffee that's sure to awaken all your senses, including the sense of freedom. So choose 1775 Coffee by going to 1775coffee.com/litter. That's LITTER, and use the code LITTER for 10% off the checkout on your first order. 1775 Coffee, brewed to perfection, crafted with revolution.
Isn't it swell? The memes make themselves. They found a rabbi hole, tunnels and all. There's Jews in the walls. Isn't it bliss? The rabbinical grace, soiling the mattresses. Well, let me tell you. If I were Rabbi Shmuley and diddle-diddle-diddle-digga-digga-diddle-diddle-dum, all day long I'd diddle little bums. If I were a Shmuley man, I'd peddle all my dildos, dreidel dildos, selling dildos with my daughter and her mum. If I were a Jewish Shmuley man, I'd be digging with a dildo in my bum. I'd wear a grotesque nose and go grab some goyim right on the nipple with a pinch. A Shabbos lap dance brace for the youngest mensch.
Hey, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down there for more AM Joy and the rest of MSNBC. And click on any of the videos right here to watch the latest interviews and highlights. And you can get more videos from MSNBC for free every day with our newsletter. Just visit